You are standing in the sunlit courtyards of Jerusalem's royal palace, sometime around the year 1168. You hear the laughter of noble boys playing the games that noble boys have played for centuries. They're roughhousing, testing each other's courage with a simple challenge, pinching each other's arms until someone flinches, until someone cries out, until someone admits defeat. It's innocent. It's stupid. It's exactly what children do when they think they're invincible. But one boy doesn't flinch. One boy doesn't cry out. One boy, perhaps 9 years old with golden hair and bright eyes, just stares at his arm where the other children have pinched him, twisted his skin, left marks that should hurt. He looks confused. Not brave, confused. Because he feels absolutely nothing. William of Tyre, the learned archbishop who serves as the boy's tutor, watches this scene with growing horror. He's educated, he's travelled, he's read the medical texts from Salerno and Constantinople. He knows what this means. He calls the prince aside, away from the other children, and tests him again. He pinches. He prods. According to his own later account, he even pierces the boy's arm with a needle. Nothing. The prince, Baldwin, heir to the kingdom of Jerusalem, future guardian of Christianity's holiest sites, feels absolutely nothing. This is the moment William of Tyre realizes he is educating a boy with leprosy, the living death. The disease that medieval Christians viewed with such profound horror that they performed funeral rites over the diagnosed while they still breathed. The affliction that marked you as simultaneously cursed by God and blessed with Christ-like suffering. And this child, this laughing boy who cannot feel pain, is going to be king of the most important Christian kingdom in the world. Before we dive into one of medieval history's most devastating and inspiring tragedies, if you enjoy learning about the figures history tried to forget, the leaders whose stories got buried beneath their afflictions, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring this 12th century story together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about people who refuse to let their bodies define their legacy. Here's what makes Baldwin's story so much more than a tale of medieval tragedy. This isn't about a king who happened to get sick. This is about a boy who received a death sentence at age 9 and then proceeded to rule one of history's most volatile kingdoms for 11 years, winning battles while strapped to his horse because his legs no longer worked, making political decisions while going blind, holding together a fractious kingdom while his own flesh literally rotted off his bones. And he died undefeated. Not just undefeated in battle, undefeated by the disease, by the politics, by the expectations that he would simply collapse under the weight of his affliction. But here's the thing that history often hides. Baldwin's tragedy doesn't begin or end with his disease. It begins with understanding what was at stake in 1174, when his father died and left the throne to a 13-year-old boy that everyone knew was dying. Let me paint you the picture of Jerusalem in the late 12th century. The Crusader kingdom, established in 1099 after the First Crusade, controls a narrow strip of coastline along the eastern Mediterranean. It's a thin, vulnerable thread of Christian territory surrounded on all sides by Muslim powers that have been fighting to reclaim Jerusalem for 75 years. To the north, the Seljuk Turks. To the east and south, something even more dangerous, Saladin. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to history as Saladin, has just accomplished what no Muslim leader has managed in decades. He's unified Egypt and Syria under one banner. For the first time since the Crusades began, the Crusader states face a single, coordinated enemy with vastly superior numbers and resources. And this enemy is brilliant, patient, and determined to reconquer Jerusalem. Into this situation, in July 1174, walks Baldwin. He's 13 years old. He's had leprosy for at least 5 years, possibly longer. His hands have started to claw. He wears gloves constantly now. His face is still unmarked. Still handsome in the way that will make his later disfigurement so much more horrific by contrast. But everyone who matters knows. The physicians know. The nobles know. William of Tyre, who's writing everything down for posterity, certainly knows. The kingdom faces an impossible choice. Crown the leper boy and risk catastrophic instability when he inevitably dies young, without an heir, with a succession crisis that could plunge the realm into civil war. Or refuse to crown him, pass over the legitimate heir, and plunge into civil war immediately. They choose the leper. On July 15th, 1174, Baldwin IV is crowned King of Jerusalem in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the same church built over the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Symbolism isn't subtle, but Baldwin isn't allowed to rule alone. Not yet. A regency is established under Raymond III of Tripoli, his mother's cousin and one of the most powerful nobles in the Crusader states. Raymond will govern until Baldwin reaches the age of majority at 15. It's a reasonable arrangement. It's also a cage. Because Baldwin, even at 13, understands something fundamental about medieval kingship. Perceived weakness is actual weakness, and nothing screams weakness like a king with leprosy who can't even rule in his own right. You have to understand what leprosy meant in the 12th century. We're not talking about the bacterial infection we understand today, Mycobacterium leprae, treatable with antibiotics, no longer even called leprosy in medical contexts, but rather Hansen's disease. We're talking about a disease that medieval people viewed through the lens of Leviticus, where God himself commands Moses to isolate the afflicted, to declare them unclean, to force them to cry out, "Unclean, unclean," when anyone approaches. Lepers were legally dead in many parts of medieval Europe. The church performed funeral rites over them. They couldn't inherit property, make contracts, or testify in court. Yet here's Baldwin, not just alive in the eyes of the law, but wearing the crown. The theological gymnastics required to make this work are extraordinary. Medieval Christians believed leprosy could be divine punishment for sin, but they also believed it could be a gift, a way to suffer as Christ suffered, to purify the soul through the flesh's destruction. Some saints were lepers. Some lepers were saints. Baldwin existed in this paradox, both contaminated and sacred, both dying and divinely appointed. And the disease is killing him. Make no mistake about that. Leprosy, particularly the lepromatous form Baldwin suffers from, doesn't kill quickly, but it kills thoroughly. It attacks the peripheral nervous system, destroying the nerves in the extremities first. That's why young Baldwin couldn't feel the pinch, the needle, the pain. Without pain, injuries go unnoticed. Without noticing injuries, infections set in. Without sensation, the body damages itself through ordinary actions: walking, grasping, rubbing. The fingers curl and shorten as tendons contract unopposed. The feet ulcerate, the face loses its nerves, and the cartilage in the nose begins to collapse, creating the distinctive leonine appearance medieval people found so horrifying. Medieval physicians can't stop any of this. They don't understand germ theory. They don't have antibiotics. Their treatments are useless at best, harmful at worst. Bloodletting to balance the humours, herbal poultices that do nothing, dietary restrictions based on ancient Greek medicine that has no relevance to bacterial infection. Some physicians recommend compounds containing arsenic, mercury, or lead, treatments that probably hurt Baldwin more than the disease itself. Nothing they do slows the progression. Nothing they prescribe eases the suffering except perhaps opium-based analgesics. And even those are limited because Baldwin has to remain functional, has to make decisions, has to rule. By 1176, Baldwin is 15. Old enough by medieval standards to dismiss the regency and rule in his own right. And he does exactly that. Raymond of Tripoli steps aside, and Baldwin takes full control of the kingdom. His hands are now so deformed he cannot hold a sword properly. His face has begun to change. His eyebrows are thinning as the facial nerves die. He tires easily. His mind is sharp as Damascus blade. William of Tyre taught him well: Latin, Greek, history, military strategy, theology, law. And Baldwin has learned one more lesson that William couldn't teach: how to project strength when your body is betraying you. The court is a nest of vipers. You need to understand the factions Baldwin is navigating while simultaneously fighting Saladin. There's the old guard nobility, men like Raymond of Tripoli, who were born in the Crusader states, who speak Arabic, who understand that the kingdom survives through a delicate balance of diplomacy and military action. They're pragmatists. They've made truces with Muslim neighbours. They understand that Crusader Jerusalem exists in a fundamentally hostile environment, and total war means total destruction. Then there are the recent arrivals from Europe. Aggressive, ambitious, seeing the East as a place to win glory and wealth. They view any diplomacy with Muslims as cowardice. They want war. Constant war, the kind of apocalyptic religious conflict that makes for great epic poetry and terrible strategic policy. Chief among these is a French nobleman named Guy de Lusignan, who arrives in the kingdom around 1180. He's handsome, he's charming, and he's going to help destroy everything Baldwin builds. In 1176, Saladin is still consolidating his power, fighting internal opponents not yet ready for a full-scale invasion. By 1177, he's ready. He invades with an army chroniclers estimate between 20,000 and 30,000 men. This is a staggering force by Crusader standards. The entire military capacity of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Every knight, every sergeant, every able-bodied man might field 8,000 men in an emergency, and many of those are garrisoning castles across the kingdom. The force Baldwin can actually mobilize for a field army is tiny. Perhaps 500 knights and a few thousand infantry. November 1177, Saladin's army is marching toward Jerusalem, expecting minimal resistance. His scouts have reported that Baldwin is weak, that the kingdom is divided, that this will be easy. Saladin makes a crucial mistake. He allows his army to spread out. His baggage train slows to cross muddy terrain near Mont Gisard between Ramla and Yibna. His forces are dispersed, and Baldwin, just 16 years old, sees the opportunity. Here's where you need to visualize what happens next. Baldwin is so weakened by leprosy at this point that he cannot mount a horse unaided. His attendants have to lift him into the saddle. Once mounted, some sources suggest he has to be partially strapped or secured because his hands can't grip the reins properly and his legs can't maintain pressure against the horse's flanks. His hands are bandaged to hide the suppurating sores, parts of his face are covered, he can barely see through the inflammation in his eyes. By any reasonable standard, this 16-year-old should be in bed, sedated with whatever passes for painkillers in 1177, waiting to die. Instead, he leads a cavalry charge. The true cross, the relic supposedly containing wood from Christ's crucifixion, is brought forward. The Bishop of Bethlehem carries it at the front of the army, and Baldwin, this rotting boy king who should be dead, who everyone expects to die, orders the charge. Frankish heavy cavalry is the most devastating military force of the medieval period. These aren't just men on horses, these are warriors encased in chainmail and plate, riding massive destriers, war horses bred specifically for combat, standing 16 to 17 hands high, weighing up to 2,000 pounds. The horses themselves wear armour. The knights carry lances 12 to 14 feet long. The combined weight and momentum of an armoured knight on an armoured warhorse moving at full gallop creates a kinetic energy that can shatter infantry formations like a hammer through clay. But cavalry charges are complex, risky operations. You need timing, you need terrain, you need your horses fresh and your enemy unprepared. Baldwin has all three. Saladin's army is spread out, not expecting battle. The terrain near Montgizard is flat enough for a charge but broken enough that Saladin's forces can't easily regroup. And Baldwin has the element of surprise. The charge hits like the fist of God. The Frankish cavalry smashes into Saladin's dispersed forces with such violence that the entire Muslim army collapses. Not retreats, collapses. Chronicles describe utter chaos. Men trampled, formations shattered, soldiers fleeing in all directions. Saladin himself barely escapes. Some accounts say he fled on a racing camel, abandoning his army. His casualties are catastrophic. Estimates suggest anywhere from 10,000 to 23,000 casualties out of his initial force. The Franks suffer perhaps 500 dead, a phenomenal exchange ratio. Baldwin has just won one of the most improbable victories in Crusader history. A dying 16-year-old with 500 knights has destroyed an army 40 times his size, commanded by the most dangerous Muslim leader in a century. Medieval chroniclers, both Christian and Muslim, call it a miracle. How else do you explain it? How else does a boy who has to be lifted onto his horse defeat Saladin? But here's what the chronicles don't emphasize. Miracles don't maintain kingdoms, battles don't cure disease, and Baldwin's body is still disintegrating. Between 1177 and 1183, Baldwin fights multiple campaigns against Saladin. He also fights a slower, more insidious war within his own court over the succession, because everyone knows he's dying. Everyone knows he cannot produce an heir, no woman will marry him, no woman can be expected to marry a leper, and even if one did, the physical capacity for consummation is doubtful given his condition. So who comes next? In 1180, Baldwin makes a decision that will haunt the kingdom. He approves his sister Sibylla's marriage to Guy de Lusignan. At the time, it seems reasonable. Sibylla is a widow. Her first husband, William of Montferrat, died in 1177, leaving her with a young son. She needs a husband, and the kingdom needs stability. Guy is French nobility, backed by powerful European connections. He's also, as it turns out, a mediocre military commander and a catastrophically poor political operator. Baldwin doesn't fully realize this yet. The leprosy continues its inexorable advance. By 1180, Baldwin's face is so disfigured that chroniclers note people avert their eyes in his presence. The disease has destroyed the cartilage in his nose. His eyebrows are gone. The nerve damage has created a leonine appearance. Facial features thickened and distorted. His hands are nearly useless now, the fingers shortened to nubs. He cannot sign documents himself anymore. He uses a stamp. He cannot walk without assistance. And his eyesight is failing as the disease attacks his optic nerves and causes severe inflammation in his eyes. Did he wear a mask? History isn't clear. The popular image of Baldwin in a silver mask comes largely from later dramatizations, particularly the 2005 film Kingdom of Heaven. Contemporary sources don't explicitly mention a mask, though they do reference face coverings and the fact that his features became hidden. Lepers in the medieval period often wore cloth or leather coverings, both to protect their damaged faces and to avoid horrifying others. What we know for certain is that Baldwin took steps to conceal his disfigurement, because medieval kingship depended heavily on visual presentation, on being seen, on the body as a symbol of political power. A king whose face provoked horror in his subjects was a king whose authority was compromised. Think about what this means on a daily basis. You're Baldwin. You're 20 years old in 1181. You wake up, if you slept, which is questionable given the chronic pain of infected lesions and damaged nerves. Your servants have to dress you because your hands don't work. They have to feed you because you can't grip utensils properly. When you walk, you shuffle carefully because you can't feel your feet. and every step risks injury you won't notice until infection sets in. You're going blind, your face is a ruin, and today you have to adjudicate legal disputes, meet with nobles who are plotting your succession, plan military campaigns against Saladin, and somehow project the authority necessary to keep this fractious kingdom from tearing itself apart. You do this every day, for years, because you're the king, and the alternative is chaos. In 1183, Saladin besieges the fortress of Kerak during a wedding celebration. The bride is Baldwin's half-sister, the groom is Humphrey IV of Tauron, the castle is full of Crusader nobility. Saladin sees an opportunity to capture multiple high-value prisoners, perhaps extract massive ransoms, maybe even kill enough Frankish leadership to decapitate the kingdom's command structure. He surrounds Kerak with his army and begins the siege. Baldwin is in Jerusalem when he gets the news. He is 22 years old. He is effectively blind. He cannot walk. His body is so ravaged that simply remaining conscious requires enormous effort. And he orders his army mobilized. His servants carry him to a litter, a covered platform that can be borne by men or mules. He cannot ride a horse anymore. He likely cannot even sit upright for extended periods. But he's going to Kerak, because kings lead, because his presence alone has strategic value, because Saladin needs to know that this kingdom has not given up. The army marches south from Jerusalem to Kerak. It takes days. Baldwin spends those days carried on a litter, probably feverish, certainly in pain despite whatever opiates his physicians can provide. When the army arrives within sight of Kerak, Saladin's scouts report the news to their sultan. The leper king has come, and Saladin withdraws. He doesn't risk battle. He doesn't test whether Baldwin's forces can break the siege. He just retreats, because Baldwin's reputation precedes him. This is the king who won at Montgisard. This is the king who has fought Saladin to a stalemate for 9 years despite dying the entire time. This is the king who refuses to surrender to his disease, his enemies, or his fate, and Saladin is too good a commander to underestimate him again. But Baldwin knows the truth. He's dying and he's running out of time. The succession crisis has gone from theoretical to immediate. Guy de Lusignan has proven himself incompetent. In 1183, Baldwin gave Guy command of an army to relieve Kerak before the siege began, and Guy botched the operation so badly that Baldwin stripped him of authority and never trusted him again. But Guy is married to Sibylla, and Sibylla is Baldwin's heir. This is where Baldwin does something extraordinary. In 1183, he crowns his nephew, Sibylla's son from her first marriage, a boy named Baldwin, as co-king. The child is 5 years old. The crown is placed on Baldwin V's head while Baldwin IV, blind and immobile, ensures the succession. But that's not enough. Baldwin IV also names Raymond of Tripoli as regent for the boy. Not Guy, not Sibylla, Raymond, the experienced statesman who Baldwin trusts to navigate the politics of a child king. This is a constitutional maneuver of breathtaking sophistication. Baldwin IV is legally binding the succession while he's still alive, creating a regency structure that explicitly excludes the one person, Guy de Lusignan, that Baldwin knows will destroy the kingdom. For a medieval monarch to voluntarily share power like this is almost unheard of. For a monarch who's seen as cursed or blessed by God, who has religious and political authority wrapped up in his person, to essentially admit that he's dying and prepare for it, that's pragmatism bordering on the revolutionary. But it requires him to live long enough to enforce it. Every day Baldwin survives is another day the succession plan holds. Every day he remains king is another day Guy can't make a move. So Baldwin clings to life. He continues to rule even as his body shuts down. He hears petitions he cannot see. He makes decisions on military matters for battles he cannot fight. He holds together a kingdom that's already fracturing, using sheer willpower and the weight of his crown. March 16th, 1185, Baldwin IV dies in Jerusalem. He is 23 or 24 years old. Sources differ on his exact birth year. He has been king for 11 years. He has had leprosy for at least 16 years, possibly longer. His body by this point is barely recognizable as human. The disease has destroyed his face, his hands, his feet. He's been blind for years. He's been immobile for years. And yet he ruled, he fought, he won, right up until his body finally gave out. He is buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site in Christianity, the church built over Golgotha where Christ was crucified. This is the same church where he was crowned 11 years earlier. Medieval Christians reserved burial in the Holy Sepulchre for the holiest of the holy, saints, martyrs, kings of exceptional piety. The fact that Baldwin is buried there tells you something crucial. Whatever horror his disease inspired, whatever contamination leprosy carried, Baldwin's subjects saw him as holy. Not cursed, holy. His suffering made him sacred. And here's where Baldwin's tragedy becomes complete. His carefully constructed succession plan lasts barely a year. Young Baldwin V dies in August or September 1186. He's 8 years old. Some historians suspect poison, though illness is equally plausible in an era of high child mortality. With the boy king dead, the crown passes to Sibylla, and Sibylla crowns Guy de Lusignan king over the strenuous objections of Raymond of Tripoli and the old nobility. The kingdom plunges into civil war. Not open warfare immediately, but the kind of cold conflict where nobles choose sides and stop cooperating. Raymond retreats to his estates and refuses to acknowledge Guy's kingship. The kingdom fractures exactly as Baldwin IV feared it would. In July 1187, just 2 years after Baldwin's death, Guy leads the army to catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Hattin. He ignores the advice of experienced commanders. He marches his army into a waterless desert. He allows Saladin to choose the ground and the time of battle. And the Crusader army, the entire military force of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, is annihilated. Most of the knights are killed or captured. Guy himself is captured. The true cross, the relic that was carried at Montgisard, is lost. 3 months later, in October 1187, Saladin's army recaptures Jerusalem. The Crusader kingdom, for which Baldwin suffered and fought and died, collapses. Saladin is merciful in victory. He allows Christian civilians to leave unharmed if they pay a ransom. A stark contrast to the massacre that followed the Crusader conquest in 1099. Jerusalem is Muslim again. The project Baldwin gave his life to defend has failed. This is the part history often forgets when it tells Baldwin's story. Yes, he won at Montgisard. Yes, he held the kingdom together against impossible odds. Yes, he died undefeated. But 2 years later, everything he fought for was gone. Does that make him a tragic hero or just tragic? Did he delay the inevitable, or could a healthy king, someone without leprosy, someone who could produce heirs, someone who could actively lead armies into his 40s and 50s, have changed history? We'll never know. What we do know is this. Baldwin IV spent 11 years proving that greatness doesn't require a functioning body. He demonstrated that intelligence, will, and political sophistication can matter more than physical strength. He showed that a society's prejudices, even ones as deep and religiously grounded as medieval horror of leprosy, can be overcome by sheer competence. But we also know the cost. Baldwin never married. He never loved, not in any physical sense. He spent his teenage years and early 20s in escalating agony, his body destroying itself in slow motion while he tried to hold a kingdom together. He died having experienced almost nothing of normal life. No tournament victories, no hunts, no dances, no private moments away from the weight of the crown. The disease that defined him also imprisoned him. William of Tyre, who discovered the first signs of leprosy in his young student, wrote this about Baldwin in his chronicle. Though he was weak in body, he was strong in spirit, and though his flesh was corrupt, his courage was whole. Medieval chroniclers loved these kinds of dichotomies, flesh versus spirit, body versus soul. They fit Baldwin into a narrative of Christian suffering and transcendence. But Baldwin was more than a narrative. He was a human being who woke up every morning knowing his body was betraying him and chose to be king anyway. He was a young man who must have looked at his ruined hands and his disappearing face and wondered what God wanted from him. He was a ruler navigating impossible political situations while literally falling apart. Here's what I think history hid behind the mask. Whether that mask was silver or cloth, or just the careful positioning of a damaged face. History hid the fact that Baldwin was terrified. He had to be. He was a child when he got the diagnosis, an adolescent when he started losing his face, a young man when he went blind. Medieval people believed leprosy was divine judgment. Even if Baldwin intellectually understood it as disease, he must have wondered, why me? What did I do? Is this punishment or test or both? History also hid the mundane horror. We talk about Montgisard and Kerak, about the grand battles and political maneuvering. We don't talk about Baldwin lying awake at night feeling nothing in his extremities, but knowing intellectually that he's injured, that he's bleeding, that infection is setting in. We don't talk about the smell, because advanced leprosy creates open sores that become infected, and medieval medicine couldn't control that. We don't talk about the isolation of being untouchable, surrounded by people but never touched except by necessity, by physicians and servants who handle you like contaminated material. And history hid the rage. Baldwin must have been furious. Furious at his body. Furious at God. Furious at the unfairness of being given the intelligence and temperament for kingship, but not the physical capacity to fully execute it. Furious at watching Guy de Lusignan, this mediocre, handsome idiot, marry his sister and position himself to inherit everything Baldwin built. That rage probably kept him alive longer than his body should have survived. Spite is a powerful motivator. But here's what history couldn't hide. Baldwin won. Not ultimately, not if you measure victory by preserving the kingdom beyond his death. But personally, individually, he won. The disease didn't break him. The politics didn't destroy him. Saladin never defeated him on the battlefield. He died as king, having ruled on his own terms as much as the 12th century allowed any monarch to do so. He created a succession plan that would have worked if a child hadn't died 2 years later. He earned burial in the holiest church in Christendom, and he did all of that while his body was committing a kind of slow-motion suicide. Think about what that means for us, listening to this story 900 years later. We live in a world obsessed with physical perfection, with youth, with bodies that perform optimally. We use filters and surgery and carefully curated social media to hide our vulnerabilities. And here's Baldwin, whose vulnerability was total, whose body was catastrophically failing in the most visible way possible, and he ruled anyway. He led anyway. He mattered anyway. That's not inspiration in the cheap motivational poster sense. That's something harder and more real. It's the demonstration that human will can matter even when everything else is falling apart. It's proof that your value isn't determined by your body's functionality. It's evidence that you can be broken and still be effective, still be important, still be remembered. But, and this is crucial, it's also a warning. Because Baldwin's story doesn't have a happy ending. He suffered enormously. He died young. The kingdom he died protecting collapsed almost immediately. His sacrifices didn't change the ultimate outcome. So is this a story about triumph or futility? About heroism or waste? Maybe it's both. Maybe that's the point. Baldwin's life tells us that fighting matters even when you lose, that maintaining your principles matters even when others abandon theirs, that being who you are matters even when your body tries to erase you. It also tells us that individuals, no matter how exceptional, can't stop historical forces larger than themselves. One brilliant king can't overcome geography, demographics, and the fundamental instability of the Crusader states. What Baldwin could control, what he did control, was how he faced his own destruction. He faced it with courage, with intelligence, with political sophistication, with enough sheer, stubborn will to keep fighting long past the point when everyone expected him to die. And that choice, to fight, to rule, to matter despite everything, is what echoes across 9 centuries. So when you hear about Baldwin IV now, don't just hear a story about a leper king. Hear a story about a boy who was told he was dying and decided that didn't mean he had to stop living. Hear a story about someone who transformed the curse everyone said defined him into the source of his strength. Hear a story about 11 years of defying every expectation, every limitation, every prophecy of failure. And hear a story about cost. Because Baldwin paid for those 11 years with everything he had. With his body, his comfort, his youth, any chance at ordinary happiness. He gave it all to be king of a dying kingdom in a hostile land, fighting an enemy that would ultimately win. Was it worth it? You tell me.
Is it worth suffering enormously to delay defeat?
Is it worth sacrificing everything for a cause that might be lost? Baldwin answered yes. He answered yes, every morning when he woke up and continued to be king, despite having every reason to quit. He answered yes when he rode to Montgisard strapped to his horse. He answered yes when he went to Carrick on a litter, blind and dying. He answered yes up until March 16th, 1185, when his body finally stopped answering at all. History tried to hide Baldwin behind his disease, reducing him to the leper king, making leprosy his defining characteristic. But what really defined Baldwin wasn't the bacteria destroying his peripheral nervous system. It was his refusal to let that destruction determine his story. He was a king who happened to have leprosy, not a leper who happened to wear a crown. And that distinction matters, because we all face things trying to define us against our will. Illness, disability, trauma, circumstances beyond our control that threaten to become the only thing people see when they look at us. Baldwin's story says you can fight that. You can insist on being more than your limitations. You can achieve things no one expects from someone in your condition. But Baldwin's story also reminds us that fighting is exhausting, painful, and doesn't always change the outcome. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose. Maybe that's the most honest historical lesson we can learn. Baldwin IV was extraordinary. He also suffered extraordinarily. He won battles and lost the war. He triumphed personally and failed institutionally. He was both hero and victim, both blessed and cursed, both vindicated and futile. He was, in other words, completely human, just human in circumstances so extreme that his humanity shines through the centuries like a beacon. The boy who felt no pain ended up teaching us something profound about suffering. Not that we should romanticize it or seek it out, but that we can endure it with dignity, that we can maintain our principles while our bodies fail, that we can matter even when we're falling apart, and that sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning, it's refusing to surrender on someone else's terms. Baldwin IV died at 23, having ruled for 11 years, having fought Saladin to a stalemate, having proven that a dying boy could be a king. His kingdom fell 2 years after his death, but his story survived, because that story of will versus weakness, of duty versus disease, of the human spirit refusing to yield even as the human body collapses, is timeless. If you found Baldwin's story as devastating and inspiring as I do, please consider subscribing to this channel, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you see Baldwin as a tragic hero or a cautionary tale? What do you think motivated him to keep fighting when surrender would have been so much easier? Let me know where you're watching from and what other forgotten figures from history you'd like to hear about, because history is full of stories like Baldwin's. People who refused to be defined by the worst thing happening to them, who fought on despite having every reason to quit, and those stories, I think, are the ones we need most.